Transmitters. They make the world go round, or at least they make your robot go around. And everything I have in front of me here are standard RC gear transmitters, which can range from very expensive to middlingly expensive to kind of cheap, but a little bit feature lacking, shall we say. So these controllers, especially the FlySky FSI6, which is probably one of the best beginner transmitters that you can get, cost somewhere around the $60 mark, which all of the rest of an ant weight will cost you something along the lines of $30 to $60. Hello everybody, I am Ben from Team Panic, and in this video I'm going to be testing 3.5 alternative transmitter and receiver combos that I have found online. Now, I am going to be testing these. I have no idea if they're going to be any good at all. Hopefully, if they are, what we will find is something that helps people get their very first combat robot up and running for the absolute bare minimum cost that you can do and still have a fairly decent system and not completely hack an RC car into a combat robot. I will say straight up front, if you feel like you want to get into combat robots and it is going to be a long-term hobby for you, skip anything like this and go straight for a conventional RC transmitter. These things are really good for what they are, and if you're going to get a year's or more's worth of use out of this, it is worth the time and investment to just go straight into the RC gear, because once you have one of these and a receiver, those electronics can get changed in and out of different robots, in and out of different weight classes, and it still is just good to go. But if you just want to dip your toe in the water and maybe try combat robots for the first time without investing significantly in it, maybe we go with something like this. Our first half contender is this little guy that looks like a game console controller of some form. I picked this thing up because I've seen people use these in the Termite League, which for those of you who haven't seen the Termite League before is a kind of laser cut jigsaw puzzle style combat robot build, which is a really cool thing, and I do want to play around with that more on this channel in the future. If you want to see some more of that, let me know in the comments down below. But I've seen people use this style of controller with those robots, which are designed to be a little bit safer and a little bit more underpowered than a conventional combat robot. So I found a listing for these online and I picked one up. Unfortunately, I got the wrong thing. So the listing that I had found and bought had a 2.4 gigahertz controller, it had a 2.4 gigahertz sticker on it, and it had a 2.4 gigahertz antenna. The thing that I actually got is a 27 megahertz radio, which, yeah, this is no good. We cannot use a 27 megahertz radio. These things interfere with each other like crazy, and they are not combat robot legal. I mean, it was also going to fall over on a number of different fronts. It's a clicky button style, so there is no proportional control. And I can't say much about whether or not it was going to fail safe, because of course this is not the right electronics in this thing at all. I was looking at this though because these are fairly cheap, sitting somewhere under $10. But yeah, if they can't send you the right thing, it's a bit of a gamble, so I'm not going to recommend anything like this. So let's look at competitor number 2 as a brief overview. When I first bought this and saw this online, what I was hoping for was this joystick going front and back like it does, and then this joystick going left and right, which it does not. It also goes front and back, which means this will do skid steering, but it does skid steering in the bad way, which means that you have to push up on both sticks to drive forwards, back on one stick and up on the other stick to turn, same again, and then that is backwards. The other thing, which may be apparent here, is that it's clicky. This is not proportional control. This is single button inputs. I did grab this one because it would potentially allow a weapon, because it has an up and a down button in here, which again are very clicky buttons, but it does come with a 3-channel receiver module, so you could actually plug 3 motors into this and actually have it do things. However, as mentioned, it is a clicky button style and the control system is very, very odd. it's one of those things that you could absolutely use this, but people who are driving on a single stick or even a stick that is actually set up with one forwards and backwards, one left and right, are going to ace you in fights because you're just gonna have to, learn this weird control system. It's not great. To the point that I'm probably not even gonna power this one up. I will say, to its credit though, it did actually come with all of the required cabling. I've added on connectors myself so that I could power it up and plug it into motors and things, but again, we're not going to do that. Contestant number 3 is by far the best of the 3 that we have currently seen. First of all, it does have proportional control. There is no clickiness here. It is a smooth sail up and down. And we also do have actual left and right on the left and right stick, which is phenomenal. And then when we have a look at the receiver board, again, it came with its own plugs. It has 2 motors, and the motors are marked as a motor left and a motor right, which means that it has inbuilt mixing for you, so you don't have to worry about anything. You just plug in your motors left and right and go for it. The other thing I quite like about this, it has an inbuilt power switch, which means that it actually works with combat robot rules and regulations, which is phenomenal, and again came with all of its own leads and stuff, and it has an LED on board as well. Although the LED is an indicator LED, which means that it will flash when it is not connected to your transmitter, which in some cases is fine and in other cases is not. You will need to check with an event organizer before actually running this without having a separate power LED if that's the way you want to go. So we're going to plug this in a minute and try it out, but first I'll show you the final contender. So here is the final contender, and this one is interesting. This is easily the most expensive of our bunch. It's about $30, so it's about half the price of the RC controllers I was showing you before, and it is actually designed to be a bait boat controller. So it's got a full joystick up the top here, which feels really nice, and there is no clickiness to this at all. It is just a proportional control system. But its receiver board is fairly large comparatively, especially when compared to the other boards and when compared to actual RC gear. So this is our little 3-channel speed controller from earlier, 3-channel receiver from earlier. You can see this board is quite massive. However, it does have a lot of things going for it. It's got a 2-motor control, which again is proportional and seemingly mixed, but we'll test this out in the near future. It also has a spot for a switch, a spot for a power LED, and a spot for a servo, which is really quite interesting because that means that this could be used as a full flipper robot potentially. Again, we will test all of the functions out and for this in just a minute. I will say that it does not come with any of its own cabling. It did have its own power lead, which I have removed to solder in a connector that will work with the batteries that I have, but none of the rest of the cabling. So you'll need to source your own plugs and bits and pieces for this. But if this thing works, it could be very interesting because again, it is half the cost of a regular transmitter and could potentially run a full amp weight with weapon. We'll just have to work out exactly what that looks like. Okay, time to test controller number 2. Now I should say that this thing I got for somewhere around $20–25. And it's kind of interesting. We will try this out. The one thing I can't really comment on here is binding. Now, normally combat robot events will want things to have been bound already pre-competition and not bind on every startup. I think this is going to be somewhat unavoidable with this kind of toy level of RC gear. So you're going to have to talk to event organizers about this type of thing because they should be fine as long as 2 people aren't running the same gear at the same time, because this type of thing seems to be the case that they only bind when they're turned on at the same time. However, I don't have 2 systems of these or any of these, so I can't actually fully confirm binding. So we're just gonna have to kind of play that one a little bit by ear. Now, this thing, first of all, we're just gonna do a quick spin and we're gonna turn off. What? That actually fail safes. I am so surprised by that, to be perfectly honest. I was not expecting this to fail safe at all, especially as this thing has a nice little picture of a plane down the front here, because plane fail safing is different from everything else. Most plane fail safing will fail safe to everything still going so that the plane doesn't crash out of the sky. Speaking of which, what we should actually do is we should test to see if it's got the same thing going forwards. Oh, it does indeed. That is really, really quite nice. Now, the other thing that you might be able to see from here is this does indeed have proportional control, so I can spin really slowly, or spin quite quickly, or spin somewhere in the middle. Yeah, so this is absolutely perfect. And this thing, it claims to have 2 amps, I believe, per channel, which is more than enough for an ant weight. I'm testing with this Scrap Heap Challenge Christmas build because the motors in here are bigger and draw more current than a conventional N20 would. So as it can handle this fairly well, it should absolutely be able to handle an ant weight build with an N20 per channel, or even 2 N20s per channel, I would say. Not really a problem there. So I am actually fairly happy with this thing. For 25 bucks, I've got all of my electronics, bar a battery and motors. Yeah, that's pretty exceptional for what that is. All right, let's try the bait boat. Okay, so now it is the time of the bait boat, and because this thing didn't come with a switch or any of its own cables, I've stolen the cables out of system number 2, and I'm going to just use this little hookup wire to flick the switch and hope that this works. Oh, okay. So despite the fact that this has an LED port for itself, there is also another LED on board, which is quite nice to see. Okay, so we have power, everything's set up. I will say that this controller is a little bit worrying because the power light comes on and it doesn't blink or anything telling you it's looking for a connection, it just turns on, unlike this thing which blinks when there is no connection, which I found quite nice because it lets you know that nothing else is hooked up and connected. But let's try spinning some wheels. Okay. That is seemingly proportional control, although we don't get. That's interesting. It's not perfect proportional control because it's designed for a boat. So it doesn't do, normally a full spin, you want one wheel going forwards and the other wheel going backwards. In this case, we're only getting one wheel going in one direction. So we're not actually getting the full proportional control out of this that I would like to see. Now the other thing is, this thing has a button up here which is a hold cruise button. Ah, yeah, that's dangerous. That's very, very dangerous because that button allows this thing to hold its current speed. Now that's the next thing, is we're going to try a failsafe. Okay. It does fail safe. That's impressive. Again, wasn't expecting that for either of these things because they are not designed for combat robots, and fail safing is not something that is needed per se. So the final thing I want to do. Oh, okay. Yeah. So the buttons on here, left and right, are for hatches, I believe, on the bait boat to like release bait or something along those lines. I don't really know. I don't know what a bait boat setup is. But that's what the servo is for, is to do this bait release system thing, I think. Which means that you get your weapon control or your servo control off of these 2 buttons. So you get a 3-position servo, which is quite nice, could be used for a lifter, but personally I would probably want to rip this whole thing apart and change this button for this button so that we don't get that cruise control anymore, and instead the swing out of the servo is now mapped to this button. But if you're going to be buying something like this, you're probably doing that because you want a fairly simple solution that you don't have to go and start soldering your own wires into. So that's probably not actually the best idea for somebody looking at using this as a combat robot design. I'll also say I've got my my motors backwards in here at the moment, so it's not actually driving exactly the way I would expect it to. But yeah, on the whole, I don't think that this thing is worth the extra $10 over option number 3 here. Because this, while the extra features are nice, and being able to control a servo without having to add any extra electronics is really, really quite cool. And that's not even, yeah, that servo is not getting hot, so that's voltage regulated and everything, which is something you absolutely need to do for these really cheap servos that I'm using. Yeah, the control system for me is a bit of a letdown. The size of the board is definitely a letdown. The fact that it doesn't come with all of its cables, it doesn't come with a switch, so you're going to need to find your own switch and solder that in there, or you're going to have to solder wires in yourself to the bottom of the board. All of that, it's just a little bit more complicated, and I don't think that this servo is all that usable or useful for combat robots when it's set up on these little buttons in here, which while you're operating the robot, you can't really get to those unless you're like double handing it. So you've got one hand on the controls and one hand on in under here, which that's a little bit fiddly, especially for me as somebody with big hands, as I've spoken about on this channel already. Yeah, that was honestly surprising. Some of this stuff was surprising more when it got here than it was actually surprising during the video. But yeah, these two controllers did surprise me during this video. I will leave a link, or try to leave a link, to where I found this particular controller on AliExpress. The one thing I didn't mention is it has buttons up here, which I don't know what they do. When you turn the controller on and press the buttons, oh, actually, it only does that when the board is plugged in. Hang on. Okay, here we go. So I've got just the board plugged in and set up. It's not plugged into any motors, but it should be fine. It's not going to short on anything. These two bumper buttons up here, when everything is plugged in and connected, you hold down the bumper button and it just beeps. There are other buttons here as well that can also cause the beeping, and I don't know what that is or why that does that. But that's apparently a thing that this controller has. The big problem with all of this is because it is direct from China, I don't have a lot of instructions on any of this stuff, and none of it came with its own instructions. There are some instructions and layouts on the actual seller page for these. This particular controller, the one that I was ragging on earlier because it's just a horrible, horrible thing in terms of its actual control style and methodology, did come with instructions, but they were purely in Chinese, so I had to go through and Google Translate them using my phone, which Google translating Chinese always ends up with some very weird garbled phrases, and it's not very easy to understand exactly what you're supposed to be doing with any of this stuff. Again, I will try and leave a link for this in the description down below. It might not be up for all that long because links to selling websites often seem to break within 6 months. If it doesn't exist, then you can do what I did, which is search for 2.4 gigahertz transmitter and receiver on AliExpress, on eBay, on Banggood, those type of places. That is the type of place where you'll find something like this. And what I find when I'm searching through online resellers and stuff like that is go by look. So you know that any controller that looks like this is going to have this type of control setup, because they always do. Anything that looks like this has the same control setup because it is exactly the same mold. Regardless of who's selling it, they've made it in the same factory, they've used the same plastics, they've used the same mold, you'll get the same electronics. It's just different people putting different stickers on it and selling it to you. So yeah, if you see something like this, you will most likely end up with something that works pretty much exactly the same as mine. and again with the little boat transmitter here. Anyway, that is going to be it from me. I hope you have enjoyed this one. I hope that this has enlightened you and helped you yeah, work out what's good and what's not in the toy end of the RC car stuff. I would say that this one is really the only one worth actually trying out at all. It's a little bit of a diamond in the rough here. I will say I'm probably going to look for some other RC boat, bait boat stuff, because this thing is very well featured for what it is. It's just a little bit awkward and yeah, needs a little bit of extra work to get it to actually happen. But anyway, that's going to be it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed that one, and I will see you in the next one.